was already getting dark outside. Lagoon announced. End of the class. It might have been difficult for the students for the first class, so he suggested that they go to their rooms and rest. Kim looked like a squeezed lemon, and it was only the first day. He did not understand how one lesson could be so long. He just wanted to take what he needed and leave. Kim has never thought about teaching anyone. He never went to school himself. Although this lesson was boring, he learned some information from it. For example, a story about one of his constellations in his past life. There were no such things as constellations. Constellation is a term used to describe the reincarnation of those who have previously experienced a large concentration of good fortune into gods. Most of the constellations are connected to hunters through sacred relics which endow them with extraordinary powers. Valhalla in Korea is the third largest academy in the world, which houses a large number of their relics, but the rest of the information regarding fencing and tactics for destroying monsters is nonsense. He needed to go to the dormitory and take up martial arts seriously because the body he had now was very weak. While he was thinking about which training method to choose for himself, at first So crept up on him unnoticed, but she was very shy. Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, Lemur showed sympathy for Lagan. It was the hardest first day in years, but he replied that it was more ridiculous than difficult. It was illogical. He couldn't stop thinking about Kim. Lagoon thought that this guy most likely got to them somehow from high school. This time in the virtual battle simulation room, he created about 120 monsters with the help of inspiration, but he just destroyed them. Even if he was from high school, he couldn't handle monsters so confidently because in high school they don't throw in real trolls and orcs. Ligon was trying to explain exactly what he did with his sword, which had no mana or energy. Based on what Elhammer knows, Kim had nothing special going for him, and that makes the situation even stranger. There were no noteworthy stories in his past either. He was an orphan. He came from a small orphanage in a very dangerous neighborhood. Perhaps he was just a falsifier. Lemur conducted his own small investigation, which confirmed all this information. So he is definitely not a liar. Besides, it would be very stupid for a faker to enter Valhalla and make such a fuss at the entrance ceremony. In addition, Kim asked the instructor for access to the Constellation room, although after the semester is over he would be able to get there without anyone else's permission. If he asks the principal, he will most likely get permission to go down there. Lemur was the one who brought him here, so he had no less responsibility. He didn't know anything about the completely closed area on the 5th floor, but anyone can get to the ground floor. Therefore, there will be no problems if he gets there a little earlier than allowed. Ligon was worried about what the next year had in store for them. The more asked if it was because of Kim, he replied that it was also because of him. There are 3 other students in his class besides him from famous families. Lemur didn't try to console him, but an exchange student from the Ventric family was assigned to another class. Yes, it was He guy from their family, Rockdale Ventric. He had heard that he had been expelled from the British Academy for some reason. Lagoon calmed down a bit after the first day of school. After this information, he begins to think that everything is not so bad. Kim, who had met Erin outside the academy, stood waiting to hear from her, but she just stood there looking at him because she was afraid to speak. Then he took the initiative and asked her what she wanted from him. She could barely get a word out. She was able to pull herself together and asked Kim to teach her fencing. Kim was not expecting this from the girl he had humiliatingly defeated at the selection. She said that the skill he demonstrated with the monsters was amazing, and she asked him to teach her how to do it. But the guy did not hesitate to refuse the girl's request. Erin really wanted to learn these techniques from Kim. She asked him why he refused. The guy replied that he just didn't want to do this routine. If she has nothing else to say, then it's time for him to go home and train. But the girl was persistent and asked again to teach her fencing. Although she was refused, Kim was getting angry because he said he didn't want to do it. Doesn't she clean her ears so much that she can't hear the people around her? He had no desire to teach anyone, so he asked me to leave him alone. After he said that, the guy just turned around and walked away. She was upset because she really wanted to learn a new technique. It was the second day of classes at Valhalla. The students were gathering outside the academy. Kim was already in class while the rest of us were getting ready. He thought about his plans and how he could get out of this place as soon as possible, because every day he disliked it more and more. He expected something like this from his body, but it was better than he had previously guessed. But he couldn't learn new martial arts because he didn't have any magical powers, and he had trouble controlling his mana flow. But the problem with magic can be solved if he finds what he's looking for, and for that he needs to accumulate a certain amount of mana. Suddenly a boy from a parallel class approached him. He came with his maid. He was from the main line of the Ventric family, Rockdale Ventric. His maid was called Yuria de Felix. She was like a prisoner of this guy. He came very close to the desk where Kim was sitting. The guy asked who was standing in front of him and why he came to him. He doesn't even know his family. He introduced himself and said that he had come here to ask a direct question. He reached out his hand and asked if he wanted to become Even stronger than he is now. In most families, it is much more difficult for people from the secondary family branch to achieve power and recognition than those who belong to the main family branch, but the Ventric family owns a mask with a beak. It is a relic of one of the constellations. Usually a constellation of S-class or higher has a guardian who is the direct protector of the family, and it is they who choose those who will become a constellation, giving them the necessary strength and protection. But the Ventric family decided to contract directly with a member of their family who had not yet been chosen by the constellation. This was the only way for the chosen person to contract with the constellation without any misunderstandings. Thanks to this decision, the Ventric family became the most influential in Europe. Being a member of the Ventric family meant that anyone could be chosen to sign a contract regardless of their background. That is why even the side branches of the Ventric family had the same power as the main one. Rockdale, who belonged to this family, was expected to be very boring. But not long ago something unpleasant happened in his life. Due to the chaos in the British Academy, he was expelled without the right to reinstatement, but he didn't care. He didn't get upset over such trifles. But he had a wonderful maid who was ready to do anything for him. He always gets what he wants anyway. Even if he was expelled, given the family he comes from, they will always find a way to get him back. He was completely satisfied with this life. The status and reputation of his family could solve any of his problems, and in most cases no one even wants to argue with him. And they find a compromise in favor of Rockdale. He planned to recruit Kim, who had attracted attention at the welcome ceremony. If he obeys Rockdale, he will guide him to the Ventric family constellation. Kim barely listened to his nonsense and asked if he was an idiot. This answer made the guy think he was shocked. No one could afford to speak and treat him like that. Rockdale asked how he dared to answer like that. Kim asked not to consider him stupid because he realized from the very beginning that he was just showing off from the moment he appeared, and he was not interested in Kim at all if he started behaving like that. It was logical to realize that he was an idiot. The guy started to get very angry and called him all sorts of insulting things. Lamor's instructor interrupted their conversation and asked the boy to return to his seat. He turned and started yelling at the teacher that no one dared to tell him what to do. He got into an incomprehensible argument that got the whole class paying attention. Lamar replied that this was not a British Academy. No matter how influential the Ventric family was, he was obliged to obey the local instructors. He calmed down a bit and realized that he was facing a Valhalla combat instructor. The guy was very angry, but he did not dare to say anything in response. He turned around, took his mate, and they left before leaving the classroom. He promised that they would meet Kim soon. Kim looked at him and did not understand his behavior at all, and so the next school day at the academy ended. Kim didn't learn anything new. He didn't learn any useful knowledge about the constellation room, and instead he had to face some idiot in the morning. Now he knew that the Guild Scouts were the outsiders who were always hanging around the school's doorstep. They didn't even use the teachers and students to find out where he was. This time, as he was leaving school, someone approached him again. She did not invent anything new and simply asked me to teach her fencing again. The guy was surprised that yesterday's rejection was not enough for her. Then we move on to the academy's dormitory. Rockdale lived in one of the upper classrooms. It was very well built, and its design was worked on for many days. Every detail was perfectly combined with the rest of the items in the room. The guy was still very angry after today's conversation with Kim. He broke the lamp because of his uncontrollable aggression. The boy could not allow some orphan to humiliate him in front of the whole class and his maid. He asked Yuria to contact Dasara. He needs him to deal with this ignoramus. Rockdale was very angry. He just wanted to destroy this guy. He asked the assistant again, but she did not answer. She was standing there as if she was also thinking about something. Rockdale was not satisfied with this and grabbed her by the hair, and he said that when he addressed her she should answer immediately. Does she still consider herself the eldest daughter of the palace family? If this is true, he will be forced to throw her out of their family. He grabbed her by the hair with all his might and threw her to the floor like a rag. He reminded her of his order to contact Dasra. He also asked me to tell the son of a rice family who is in the 2nd grade that Ventric would like to see him. Meanwhile, Kim was in his dorm room and continued to train and strengthen his body. For the strength he has, he needs to pump his body so that he can use it to the maximum. He meditated and practiced concentration every day, but it was very difficult for him. His body refused to withstand such loads. It was very weak and he could not get even a particle of magic with it. The guy froze in place and remembered the moment when Erin asked him to become her teacher. She followed him to the dormitory. Her character was quite stubborn and she refused to accept that Kim had rejected her. She is not used to being rejected. When they were almost at the dormitory, Kim asked how much longer she would follow him. She kept repeating the same thing like a parrot. Sohan annoyed him a lot and he needed to get rid of her somehow. He came up with an answer that would make her leave him alone. The guy said that one lesson from him would be worth 10 million. The girl tilted her head and began to think Kim was sure she wouldn't be able to afford it, so he wanted to go to his room in peace. After a long silence, she asked the guy for his phone. He was surprised and could not understand why she needed his personal phone. He took his phone out of his pocket and gave it to the girl. She took it in her hands and said she would write down her phone number, because it will be much easier for her to transfer money to him. Kim was shocked. He wanted to get rid of her, but the girl was so stubborn and determined that she agreed to the provocative proposal. He decided to unlock his phone and check his account. 100 million was transferred to it a minute ago. She sent him money for 10 training sessions and now hoped he would start training her. But the guy refused again and started rejecting the transaction. At that moment, he was really shocked. How could an ordinary student transfer 100 million in one payment? If he had started teaching her, he would have had to reveal all his secrets. It was such a large amount of money, but now it doesn't matter. The matter is closed. It's just money which has no value to him. All he has to do is find what he needs, even if he has such a small amount of mana. As soon as it got dark, he got dressed and went to the exit. He tried to move very quietly so that no one would notice him, took some tools and a backpack with him. He went to the academy at night, but he did not know how many guards were there and where they were located. He decided to take a shortcut and went through the forest. Before entering this school, he first checked it out, but most of the records that were hidden 300 years ago were destroyed. According to his investigation, there should have been at least 4 recordings left by now, but most likely there are only 3 of them left. And the most important thing is that they were hidden in the Valhalla Mountains. He stopped and looked around, then he put on his hood and went in search. He activated his mana, which he managed to accumulate in order to understand the location of the records. He can locate it by feeling the marble using the small amount of magic now concentrated in his body, and he can still sense the location. The first record, he was clearly shown where the point where the records were hidden was located. He could see it clearly in front of him and was ready to start excavating. This place was very well shown for understanding. He took a shovel out of his backpack and started digging. But again his body failed him. His endurance was decreasing very quickly. If he had known it would be so hard, he would have buried it in an easier place. If the tower had not been destroyed 300 years ago, there would have been no need to do something like this. The world was on the verge of destruction, and there was no room for his riches. He hoped that they were safe and sound inside. He had to dig a deep enough hole to find these records. They were located about 3 meters underground, but he still had to find the keyhole. Kim started feeling around the perimeter of the dug hole with his hands and found that he didn't have the right key, and a regular one wouldn't do. He was going to create a magic thread with which he could open this lock. The guy will form the necessary key from it, and he will try to use it for this lock. He was pleased with the work he had done. The wrench fit perfectly. There was plenty of space inside, and you could hide all kinds of things there. The guy opened the door and started to climb inside. There was a lot of jewelry and money there. It was all his. He had accumulated it in his past life. He could finally use them after they had been lying around for 300 years. The entire storage was filled with money and weapons. There were also various precious things and objects. He stood there and thought about how hard he had managed to make these savings. Now that he can finally stop worrying about money, you can start looking for the right things. While he was looking through the coins, he noticed something. Among the pile of coins were accumulating stones. He poured a lot of magic into his recordings to preserve them, but now it's time to use them. He took one of the stones in his hand, and it immediately activated. It took him no effort at all to do so. It was expected. He accumulated stones. They were overwhelmed with magical power. He could control their power, but their power was too great. First, he needs to deal with the remaining stones. Should he leave the gold bars here and take the jewelry that weighed less? Every school day was a challenge for Kim, and this time he had additional problems in the form of crepitus. If he really thought he could pull off something like this in the future, he is just a rare idiot. Kim could not feel his body after a few swings of the shovel. What kind of hunter is this who can't even hold a shovel in his hands? While he was collecting his thoughts, Erin approached him. She started asking me to teach her the art of swordplay. He could no longer understand whether it was stubbornness or a desire to learn. According to the information he found when he was reborn, Choijin's family is a professional fencer. But why does it need him? He decided to ask her why she was asking him to do this so insistently. After all, her family could teach her as well as he could, but she wanted to learn from him because Erin had never seen anyone better with a sword than him. But what about her father, the head of the family? He was a master of this business. Why did she write him off? He should be much better than a beginner student. She didn't have time to say anything about her father because Kim called Ligon into the teacher's lounge. He asked why he had to go to the teacher's lounge. They could have talked here or in the corridor. This was in reference to his past request and reward for destroying all the monsters. If he wasn't interested, then Ligon could just leave, but the boy abruptly stood up and approached the teacher. He wasn't worried about the fact that they hadn't finished talking to Erin, but the girl wanted to get an answer to her request. Even though she expected to be rejected again, Kim decided not to respond to her questions and requests at all. But then she heard that he told her to be ready at 6 a.m. and go to the training ground, which is located on the territory of the academy. She did not expect to receive such a response that she could not even speak. Kim stopped, turned to her and asked her why she was silent. She still couldn't speak, but she suddenly started waving her head in different directions. Then she added that she would definitely be on time. Meanwhile, Ligon and Kim went into the teacher's lounge. The instructor said that he was about to start his lesson, so he would try to be brief. First, he talked to the director and was allowed to visit the constellation room. He needs to go down to the basement, because except for the first, the rest of the levels will be closed to him. Kim understood and asked the instructor when he could go down there. If he is satisfied, he can leave tonight. Was surprised because he expected the boy to make a scandal over the ban on the second and subsequent floors, but he didn't say a word about it. Lagoon allowed him to leave. The boy returned without any complaints and went to his classroom for lessons.